Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this exceptional session titled Medicine, Mind, and Mysteries. How Ibn Sina shaped three words. It is my great honor to introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Roy Casagranda, a celebrated American political analyst, academic, and Golden Narrative laureate. Dr. Casagranda currently serves as a professor of political science at the UAE University, known for his groundbreaking work on the Arab civilizations. He brings a powerful blend of scholarship and vision to today's topic. In this session, Dr. Roy will take us on a remarkable journey through the life and legacy of Ibn Sina, one of history's greatest minds, revealing how his work in medicine and philosophy continues to influence the world today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Roy Casagranda.
Assalamu alaikum. All right, so some of you have seen my stuff before, and you know what I'm going to do, which is I'm going to do a little background and then jump into the topic. The background I want to start with is, my goal is to put Ibn Sina into the big picture. So I thought about how to do this, and one way would be to tell his story and then jump into some of his philosophy. But every time I did that, I thought it would just be like a little weird window into a personal life, and it didn't connect it, because he's actually part of a thread. So a little bit of background on what I studied. I actually studied German philosophy, and the Germans that I was studying were quoting Ibn Sina. In other words, he's part of this thread that goes right into contemporary German philosophy today. So I want to put him into that. To do that, though, I have to start kind of far back. So about 290 BC, which is way before Ibn Sina, the Greek ruler, the Greek pharaoh of Egypt, his name was Ptolemy I, Ptolemy Soter, decided that he wanted to harness Egypt's incredible technological advantage. He picked Egypt as the place he wanted to be the ruler of, because when Alexander the Great died, the generals scrambled, and each one tried to become the next emperor. There was an Alexander the Fourth, because Alexander the Great was the third. There was a fourth, but he was young, he was like 8. And so the generals didn't want to wait for this guy to become an adult. They wanted to take him out and then become the next emperor. And Ptolemy picked Egypt on purpose. He was in a position where he could pick, in part because of its technology. So he created the Great Library to be a place where that technology was brought into one location. The Great Library gets destroyed 680 years later in a moment of, regrettable religious fanaticism. An angry mob sets the Great Library on fire in 391 AD. Having said that, the library was already in a little bit of decline, but then fix it, put some money into it, and get it going again. Don't set it on fire. So that's really the wrong answer. For our purposes, we get lucky. The reason we get lucky is because the Roman Empire, as it was going into decline, began setting all its other libraries on fire as well. And that's a catastrophe for the world, because we lose a lot of the material that had been generated up until that moment. So for example, when I was in school, I was taught that in 1492, Columbus discovered the Earth was a sphere. That's not true. That's not what happened. 600 BC, the pharaoh Neches sent an expedition around Africa. He believed he had a hypothesis that Africa was a continent completely surrounded by water. So he took Egyptian ships and he grabbed some Phoenicians because they were the best sailors on the planet, and he had them supplement the Egyptian crews, and they went across the Mediterranean to Morocco, and then from there they launched, and they went all the way down the west side of Africa and all the way up the east side of Africa, and the ancient Egyptians had already built a canal that connected the Nile to the Gulf of Suez, so the boats just went through and popped back out in the Mediterranean. They literally did a 360 around Africa. They completely circumnavigated it. And what they noticed was that the star formations changed, and the position of the sun in the sky changed. So when they got back, they went, there's only one possible explanation for what we witnessed, and that is that the Earth is a sphere. So literally 2,600 years ago, the Egyptians proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Earth was a sphere. There was no other explanation for what they had experienced. So Columbus, 500 years ago, didn't do that, right? But that's how we were taught history. And that's one of the things that has obviously motivated me in the type of talks that I do, is to break down these silly little things that we've done that are wrong. You know, like I was taught Henry Ford invented the car, which was really weird because he worked for Oldsmobile making cars before he started the Ford Motor Company. So he invented the car after he started working for a car company. Like, how did that happen? So weird. Daimler, right? The Germans invented the car. So, anyway. The reason why what happened in the Great Library was a catastrophe was we lost a lot of material. At one point, Aristotle went to 150 Greek city-states, and he either got a copy of their written constitution, or if they had only an oral constitution, he wrote it down, and he put them into one book. And then he did an analysis at the end, where he talked about what he thought worked, what didn't work. He did a compare and contrast analysis of all 150 constitutions. Every political scientist on the planet would cut off their left arm to see this thing. Maybe their right one too. I mean, you just figure out a way to write useless articles some other way. And we'll never do it because all the copies were destroyed. We have 1.5 of the 150 constitutions. We have Athens' constitution, and we know enough about Sparta's constitution that we can basically understand its structure. But we don't actually have it. But we know enough pieces that we got it mostly. 1% survived. There are works that we have lost that we will probably never read, but here's why we got lucky. Right before the Roman Empire had finished off the last of its libraries, a group of scholars in 410 AD decided to try and salvage this. They tried to recreate an academy that would replace the Great Library. They did it in Athens. They thought, let's go to Socrates and Plato's. Alexandria's out of the picture. Let's go to Athens and start over. 119 years later, in 529, Emperor Justinian I ordered that academy closed. When he did that, the scholars knew not to wait for the torches to come, set the place on fire. They grabbed the books, they ran to the port, they hired ships, they went to Antioch, they hired a caravan, they went by land to the Persian Empire, and then asked for political asylum from the Persians. And they didn't just ask for political asylum for themselves, they asked for political asylum for their books. And the Persians went, yeah. One of the reasons why the Persians were so excited was they got jealous of the Great Library in the 3rd century AD and built their own Great Library version in a place called Gondishapur. And so they just took those books and they integrated them in. We get lucky a second time because then the Arabs are going to create the Arab Empire beginning in 633, and they're going to conquer the Persian Empire, and they're going to conquer about 3/4 of the Roman Empire, and they're going to put together the world's largest ever empire to that date. There have been empires much bigger since, but not prior to that. And they built this empire really fast. By the way, be careful about building things too quickly. There's things that go quickly tend to go quickly, if you know what I mean. Take your time, do it right. That's my suggestion. Anyway, the Arab Empire by 711 AD, so it starts getting built in 633 when Abu Bakr tells Khalid ibn al-Walid, keep going, and keep going meant invade Persia. And by 711, so what is that, 78 years? I don't know, I did the math in my head real quick. It's probably totally wrong. They owned everything from basically Pakistan to Spain, including Central Asia. Massive empire. And within 150 years, it's gone. It collapses. Now, one of the reasons it breaks apart is because of the Abbasid revolution. So one of the interesting things about the Arab Empire was the first fitna, in a way, is a conversation through violence. But, right, isn't that what war is? It's just a conversation. It's just the normal channels of conversation broke down, so we decided to kill each other to resolve the problem. In a way, the first fitna was a question of which direction the Arab Empire was going to point. The Umayyads wanted the capital in Damascus, which had been part of the Roman Empire. The Abbasids wanted the capital, eventually moved the capital to Baghdad. It was a Persian village that they renamed Medinat al-Salam, and then said nobody would ever capture it. Whenever you hear something like that, you know to be afraid. Never is not something, it's a word that we should not have in any human language. Like, there's no such thing as never. So, where Baghdad was, that was in the Persian Empire. So the Abbasids, by having the revolution in 750 and overthrowing the Umayyads, shifted the direction of the Arab Empire towards Persia, and then the Persians slowly began to undermine the Arab Empire from within because they aspired to be free again. They didn't want to be under Arab rule. They wanted to break away and go their own way. And before you know it, the Buyids have broken away. And there's multiple states start to cleave off. And so the Arab Empire disintegrates really fast because the Buyid state ends up being Iraq, part of Turkey, Persia, and Iraq is where the Khalifa was in Baghdad, so he's basically at their mercy. Having said that, when the Arabs conquered Gondishapur, they did something really unusual for conquerors. Instead of walking in and plundering the place and smashing the place, so I'm part Italian, so I'll be mean to Romans because I can. So when Gaius Julius Caesar, the guy you incorrectly called Julius Caesar, conquered Gaul, there were 3 million people living there. When he left, there was 1 million people living there. But don't worry, he didn't kill everybody. He only killed 1 million people, so that's just a third of the population. He enslaved the other third. That's why they weren't there anymore. They were taken to the slave markets in Rome. He made a lot of money. Like, this is good business. Nothing like a little bit of genocide, technology capture. France had a lot of gold, so they're filthy rich afterwards. That's why he did it, right? He's just there for the plunder and the brutality of it all. When the Arabs conquered, they weren't like that. So when they captured Gondishapur, instead of plundering the place, they were curious about it. And they asked the Persians to explain what they were looking at. And the Persians said, this is an academy. And the Arabs went, cool, we're not sure you know what that is. And they left it alone. When the Abbasids take over, the Abbasids go, we need to get those books out of the academy and bring them to Baghdad to see if we can harness that information. And they put money into harnessing that information. And that triggers what we call the Islamic Golden Age. And as a result, we have the ability to read most of Plato's works, most of Aristotle's works, some of Sophocles and Aristophanes' works. We know that Eratosthenes figured out the size of the earth, right? Because there was enough of that material that got from Athens to Gondishapur that the Arabs then preserved and then harnessed. Having said that, two of the first two big philosophers are Al-Khwarizmi and I'm having an old person moment, and I've just lost. Anyway, it's okay. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Let him go. I know some of you are thinking you're screaming the name, and I can't hear you. It's okay. So Al-Khwarizmi, of course, gets totally involved in mathematics. He's dabbling in a little bit of philosophy, but math is his real passion. And he's diving into Indian mathematics, and it takes off. And Al-Kindi there, my old person moment has passed, and I can move on now. And so Al-Kindi, of course, is trying to figure out how to mainstream Greek philosophy, because in his mind, it doesn't matter where the wisdom comes from, all wisdom is valid wisdom. And so he's working on that as a project. But in a way that a lot of that Greek information doesn't really take off just yet. And most of the Arab philosophers, or Persian philosophers, because a lot of them were Persian, and by the way, some of them were Christian as well, so it wasn't just Muslims, and there were some Jews involved. In other words, this was a multi-ethnic, multi-religious project. What they realized real early on was a love of Plato, but they weren't necessarily all that involved in Aristotle. So for the record, every once in a while I'll run into people who are, I'm a philosophy professor, and I'm like, cool, what's your interest? And they go, Aristotle. And you didn't get an update? There's nothing that happened, like, I don't know, in the 20th century you wanna go check out? It's just me being probably a jerk, but like, it's a question I have. And then Aristotle, dude, if you're gonna do somebody, it's gotta be Plato. But so, Aristotle, don't get me wrong, is really important. It's just I don't get when people get attached to him, because I kind of dislike him. So, but that's my bias. To me, Plato is like he's trying to get to the ideal. Aristotle's just nasty. The politics. You're writing a book about politics. First chapter, I want you to do something like, I don't know, define politics. Like, give me something. He dives into slavery. That's your first chapter? Like, we're talking about slavery, so politics is just slavery? This is too like TV these days. It's just gloomy and desperate and terrible. Like, no, please tell me there's something better than this. Anyway, so that's where I get stuck. So what happens then is we get a guy named Farabi. Farabi really gets into philosophy, and he takes off. Farabi, however, is nervous. He's worried that if he publishes while he's alive, that will terminate his life because he'll get in political trouble. So he gets these odds and ends jobs, like he's a guard, he's a gardener, he does whatever, and then he studies and he goes and he learns from all these philosophers, and he's writing like crazy, and then he publishes in his will. That way, if anybody hates what he wrote, you can't kill a dead guy, and he sort of pulls it off. That's in the 900s. By the time we get to Ibn Sina, he was born around 980, we don't really know the year, in a village near Bukhara in what is today Uzbekistan. By the time we get there, there's a new state in Central Asia, the Samanid Empire. So before we go on, because when we think of Central Asia today, we think of an area that's majority Turkish. So for the longest time, there were two Persian populations. There were the southern Persians, who were the civilized Persians. They read, they were really into knowledge. They did things like the Academy at Gandhi Shapur. They built an empire built on tolerance. They built roads and trade networks and they built a Qanat system where water is flowing underground to irrigate far off distance places. Those guys. And then there were the Persians in the north that were called the Saqqa. And Europeans called them Scythians. And they were crazy Persians. They were like the opposite of the southern Persians. They covered in tattoos, and they would take knives and they would carve scars into their face and chest because they wanted to show how tough they were. And they would drink out of human skulls. And they would go into combat with their hair starched, covered in paint, and they were just screaming, slaughtering. And right before they'd go into combat, they would boil ephedra, which is a stimulant, and then they would pour wine into a human skull, and they would drink that. So they were like hopped up on basically meth and alcohol, and they'd go flying into battle. I like them a lot. Like if you're gonna kill people, you might as well do it with a little bit of style and class. So, unfortunately for the Saka, the northern Persians, they started to get civilized. It's the death knell. And so when the Mongols start to put pressure on the Turks, and the Turks start to look for a new place to live, and the Turks start migrating westward, they run into these civilized Saka and overrun them. And that's exactly where Ibn Sina's story is going to go. So he's born around 890 in the Samanid state, which, by the way, is in the middle of a sort of a second wave of a golden age. For whatever reason, Bukhara and Samarkand as well had become intellectual centers. And people were going there and they were studying, and it was an exciting time period. Ibn Sina's dad was a minor bureaucrat in the Samanid state. Nothing interesting about him. What was interesting about him was how he decided to educate his son. So first, Ibn Sina actually memorized the Quran. I think he memorized it by around age 12. Which I've never successfully memorized any strip of text in my life, let alone a whole book. Like, my favorite professor, you could do that. You could be like, okay, John Stuart Mill, On Liberty, page 6, third paragraph down. And he'd think about it for a second, and then he'd start to recite it for you. And you're like, dude, how are you doing this? So they're out there. It's just I can't comprehend it. In any case, what Ibn Sina then starts to do, I think his father realizes, man, he's smart, let's keep him going, is he takes Ibn Sina to a grocer, to an Indian grocer. And he pays the Indian grocer to teach Ibn Sina math. The reason is because India had broken out mathematics. That's why Al-Khwarizmi is going to invent algebra. He's building it on top of Indian mathematics. He doesn't, by the way, create Arabic numerals. Arabic numerals are misnamed. They should be called Hindi numerals or Indian numerals. And both sets of numbers, the ones that are used in the Asian part of the Middle East in Egypt, and then the ones that are used in Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, right, and Europe, and North America, and South America, and the rest of the world, both sets were invented in India. What Al-Khwarizmi did was he popularized those numbers and then built algebra. And by the way, the first ever algorithm. And when Romans tried to say Al-Khwarizmi, they said algorithm. So every time you're saying algorithm, you're saying the mispronunciation of Al-Khwarizmi. So poor guy, like he's in the afterlife going, but what can you do? Listen better? I don't know, I'm gonna throw that out there. So, he goes and he learns mathematics from this Indian grocer, and then he gets a tutor. And the tutor starts teaching him some Greek subjects. And as he's learning these Greek subjects, he's integrating them in with his day-to-day experiences. And at some point, he gets a physician who starts tutoring him. And the next thing you know, he's actually in the court as a teenager as an official physician for the royal court. He proved himself as a teenager to just be such an amazing physician that he gets hired on in the royal court in Bukhara. And so now he's totally connected to the court. The problem is the Samanid state is in really big trouble. In 991, the Karakhanid Turks attack. So 991, Ibn Sina is like 11. So he hasn't even gotten into the royal court at this point. They actually captured Bukhara, and it looks like the Samanid state is over. Long story short, the political leaders of the Samanid state managed to rally. They recapture Bukhara. They reestablish the state. They stabilize things. It's not great, but they're okay. And then shortly afterwards, Ibn Sina ends up in the court treating people for illness. And then in 999, so just 7 years after they recapture Bukhara, the Karakhanids attack the Samanids again, and this time it's over. By the way, it's Nur II. He was the Samanid leader who rallied the first time. His son takes over. He rules for 2 years. Then the last son rules for a few months. and the Samanid state is destroyed. The Karakhanids capture Bukhara. Khorasan gets captured by the Ghaznavids, and that's it. It's done. Ibn Sina can't stay because his connections to the royal court made it so that the Karakhanids didn't like him and they didn't trust him. So he leaves, and he goes to Gurganj. So Gurganj had been part of the Samanid Empire, but the Karakhanids hadn't captured it yet. So he's thinking maybe we can, like a piece of the Samanid state will survive. Gurganj is in the delta that goes into the Aral Sea. If you look at a map today, there's not much left of the Aral Sea. It's okay, let's just destroy the planet. What do our grandchildren and children need it for? You know what I mean? We'll party like this is the end because we're treating it like it is. Anyway, there used to be this really amazing saltwater lake there. Anyway, so Gurganj was this thriving city. He's trying to make a life for himself there. And then he gets an offer from Gurgan. Gurgan is in Iran, what is today Iran. In Tabaristan, it's on the very eastern edge, so if you southeastern corner of the Caspian Sea. And he gets there just after the guy who made him the job offer had passed away. And so he feels like, okay, this is the guy I wanted to work for. That was my patron. He's dead. And he didn't really like the son who had taken over. So he tried going to an area between the Aral Sea and the Caspian Sea and trying to figure out if he could figure out something there. There's no real opportunities. So he returns back to Gurgan, and he figures out a way to make use of this patron, the son. But it doesn't quite work. He stays there for a few years, and he decides it's just not the right thing. And so he moves to Ray. So Ray is right next to Tehran. So for those of you who know any Iranian geography, it's right there. He moves to Ray, and in Ray he has kind of an interesting situation. So Ray is ruled by a woman. Her name is Sayyida Shirin. So Shirin is sweet in Persian. Sayyida is happiness, right? So happiness, sweet. It's such a good name. I love the names from the time period, right? A few years later, we'll get Nizam al-Mulk. Who doesn't want that as a name? Wow, I want that as that is such a cool name. Shahan Shah al-Afdal. So the king of kings, the best. Like, man, how do you get better than that? Clearly, he's just, wow. I feel like they were rapper names. You know what I mean? Like, they took it to a brand new level. So, Shirin is not officially the ruler. She is the ruler, but she's not officially the ruler. Her two sons, one is the guy ruling Ray, and the other one is the guy ruling Hamadan, are actually supposedly on paper the rulers, but she's the actual ruler. And Ibn Sina gets a job working for her. Initially, he just does her finances. So initially, he's working basically as a high-class accountant, but as time goes by, he eventually becomes basically the wazir for Ray. He decides to go to Hamadan to participate in a debate. And by this point, he has a pretty good reputation as a philosopher. So in the Muslim world at the time, if a philosopher traveled to a new city, the expectation is that philosopher would get in a debate with one of the best philosophers from that city. And the reason for this was just to have an exchange of ideas, to sort of stimulate conversation. That's what it was meant to do. Like, it wasn't meant to be a hostile thing or a rough and tumble thing. It's meant to be, what are the ideas you're bringing from Ray? We'd love to hear them in Hamadan. And then you have kind of a debate, and you work it out. It was competitive. We're really hoping our guy from Hamadan beats you. But, it wasn't meant to be ruthless. It went ruthless. And before you know it, Ibn Sina is shouting at the guy, and he says, "You don't know logic. You didn't learn rationality." And the Hamadan guy then accuses Ibn Sina of using the Quran style in his writing, which he says is heresy. And Ibn Sina is freaked out because he doesn't know what to do now. And the two guys become really bitter enemies. And then the guy in Hamadan decides he's moving to Ray. So Ibn Sina goes, okay, and he moves to Hamadan, and they switch places. because he just figures he just shouldn't be in the same city with this guy. When he gets to Hamadan, the ruler was Shams al-Dawla. And he ends up becoming the wazir for Shams al-Dawla, which is the son of Shirin, right? It's still this thing that's going on. But Shams al-Dawla is actually ruling Hamadan a little bit more than his brother was ruling Ray. And he gets along with Shams al-Dawla. It's a good job. He's advising on political matters, military matters. He also becomes a physician actually, in Ray, he became the son had bad depression. Did you know they had depression back then? I just thought that was something we created recently. I get it. It's depressing. So, by the way, denying that you have depression doesn't make it go away. Just a heads up. I know that's like the chief tactic. It probably makes it worse. You're better off owning it. I'm speaking from experience. And then figuring out how to fix it. I still am working on that. So he ends up treating this guy unsuccessfully for depression. But anyway, when he's in Hamadan, he's making a good life for himself, and then Shams al-Dawla dies. His son Sama al-Dawla is not the same kind of guy his father was, and instead of working for him, Ibn Sina and his patron go into hiding. And they're like living in like this getaway part of town, pretending that they don't exist anymore. And the ruler is looking for them because he really wants Ibn Sina to be his wazir. And Ibn Sina wants nothing to do with this. This goes on for months. Finally, somebody rats them out. And when they do, Ibn Sina is actually captured and put in prison. And he'll stay in prison for about 4 months. The thing that gets him out is Sama al-Dawla's cousin. His name was Dushman Ziyar. He has a much longer name, but we're going to go with Dushman Ziyar because it's a cool version. So these guys were all from Tabaristan. They were all Persian. They were Daylamite warriors. The Buyids were. But one of the Buyid warriors, who's the guy who's ruling Esfahan, decides he's not going to listen to the Buyid state anymore, and he breaks away, and he takes Esfahan out. And he creates a Kakuyid state. And that guy is Dushman Ziyar. When he realizes that his cousin, I guess it's his first cousin once removed, because Shirin was his aunt. When he realizes that his cousin has Ibn Sina in a prison, he decides this is intolerable. And he actually takes his army, marches to Hamadan, conquers it, and breaks Ibn Sina out of prison, and says, "Would you like to work for me in Esfahan?" And Ibn Sina goes, "That sounds like a great job opportunity." And he moves to Esfahan, and they end up having a fantastic relationship. He becomes the wazir for Dushman Ziyar. In 1025, he writes the Canon of Medicine, which of course is his opus magnum. The Canon of Medicine completely transforms medicine. Up until then, the dominant belief was there was disease. It was a singular thing. And how disease manifested in your body was a function of what you ate that day, where the planets were, if a black cat walked in front of you, right? So like if it was a white cat, maybe you coughed a little bit, but if it was a black cat, you might like bleed out your eyes or something. And Ibn Sina goes, this is completely insane. How are you not observing what's really going on? There's clearly different kinds of diseases. They have transmission vectors, and the way they manifest is based on the disease you got, not all these other ridiculous things you're ascribing illness to. And that's a core part of the canon of medicine. Another part of the canon of medicine was a bunch of cures. He gave a bunch of cures. And for the next 650 years, this was the dominant way people got cures, was they went to the canon of medicine. But if that was all he did, it would have been good but not great. What he really did that was transformative in the canon of medicine was he said, you know what's better than a cure? Not getting sick. Don't. Just prevent it. And so what he says is we should interrupt the transmission vectors. We should figure out how each disease is transmitted and then make sure we don't allow the transmission. That's the core of modern medicine. and that's why he gets called the father of modern medicine. Now, he's not the father of medicine, that's incorrectly ascribed to Hippocrates, but he is the father of modern medicine. But he isn't just doing medicine, he's also doing physics, and he's doing philosophy, and he's doing astronomy. So we obviously don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to give you my favorite piece, because I told you I did German philosophy, so I'm going to hook it back in. So Plato said that the way we experience reality is actually a copy of a copy. By the way, have you been experimenting with AI? I'm not happy. I have yet to do a historical fact check through AI and land on the right answer. Maybe I'm using the wrong thing, but I feel like it's a copy of a copy of a copy. I feel like AI is more keen on giving you an answer than on getting it an accurate answer. I wouldn't use it for facts. Like, I almost feel like it just wants you to be happy, not knowledgeable. I'm a little nervous about this. Because, if everybody's going to just start using AI, there's going to be a lot of gibberish. Maybe I'm just really unlucky, and I don't know how to do these. Anyway, I'll give you an example. So I was doing research on the year 1186, and I noticed there were a bunch of people getting sick. So I thought, okay, I'm going to drop this search into Google and see if there was a pandemic in 1186 in Syria. And so and then AI popped up with an answer. I don't use AI for obvious reasons. It's never accurate. And it goes, yes, there was a bubonic plague outbreak. And I was like, whoa, cool. And it goes, it's the plague of Amwas. And I'm like, oh, no. The plague of Amwas was in 638, not 1186. It was just trying to make me happy. And then just to bring it home, the year after the year of the ashes, which was in 638. And you're like, oh, too bad. You missed so badly. Anyway, so I can see people writing papers using this wrong data. This is a disaster. Can't wait to read those papers. By the way, as a teacher, I had to switch to in-class tests. There's no point, because when I was grading, I was doing things like, oh, is that you, GPT? F. Good to meet you. Because it's got a style. It's artwork where it has 3 eyes and 4 arms, and you're like, no, I wanted a human. What? Anyway, sorry for bashing AI so much. And then I guess if you ask it to do a grammar check, maybe that'll work. Like, check my grammar. So here's what happens. Plato says that the world we experience is a copy. So this podium is a copy of an idea that was in my head. And in my head it was perfect, but in reality it's not perfect, because there's little flaws, like there's a little ding here, and honestly, there's probably not a lot of 90-degree angles on it. It's probably like 89.99 degrees or 90.1 degrees. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's close. We can't discern it with our eyes, but there's flaws in it. It's not perfect. But in our head, we had this great idea for how this podium should be shaped. But then Plato says, how did we get that idea? He said there's a plane of existence where ideas are in their perfect form. He calls the plane of existence the idios, which usually is translated into English as the forms. And our mind reaches into that plane, grabs the podium idea, and then our hands make the podium. So the podium's a copy of a copy, right? What was in our head was a copy of the form. Aristotle comes along and goes, what is he talking about? He's crazy. Ignore Plato, that was nonsense. Aristotle says this podium is a combination of essences. I don't know what the material is, but I'm assuming there's plastic and wood and paint, right? So essence of paint, essence of wood, essence of plastic, essence of 90 degrees, essence of 25 degrees. I made that number up, I have no idea. Right, there are these essences that go together to make this podium. Ibn Sina goes, if that's true, then all a thing is a combination of information. So when I describe the podium, I'm describing its essences, its angles, its color, its material composition. That ding there, there's some kind of discoloration here. I don't know what it is. There's another one over there. There was clearly something on here at one point. Right? There's all this stuff. But if I were to go back to the day when we got this podium fresh out of the box, it didn't have that ding and those black marks on the top. So as this podium ages, it gains information and becomes harder to describe. Just like as I age, I gain information and I become harder to describe. You get scars and heartbreak and broken bones, and maybe a little bit of knowledge goes in, but we all know that's not much. And, right, because, anyway. We try, but let's be honest, the smartest person on earth is still an idiot. Think of how much information is in the world. It's like all the best any of us can do is have a little piece and become really good at a couple of things, which is why we need to learn to be a little more humble about what we think we know. Anyway, as time goes by, I as an individual start to get wrinkles and little age spots, and right, they become harder and harder to describe because things are happening. And then Ibn Sina asks himself a really interesting question. What if I run the clock backwards? In other words, as time goes by, information increases. That's clear. But what happens if I go back? And he doesn't mean for me as an individual or this podium fresh out of the factory. He means the entire universe. What if I ran the clock back on the entire universe? Here's what he concludes. That eventually you would reach a point where you had just enough information. There was an information packet that was just big enough that the entire universe could unfold from it. Information increases with time. That's the concept of entropy. If you run the clock back and you have a single point in time, that's singularity. He described Big Bang 950 years before Big Bang. And he called it necessary being. And he said the entire universe unfolds from this tiny information packet. There was a German named Husserl who read that. He went nuts, and he created a whole new strain of German philosophy called phenomenology. His student was a guy named Martin Heidegger. Heidegger took philosophy and shook it and flipped it upside down. By the way, he's quoting Ibn Sina as well. He loved Ibn Sina as well. Martin Heidegger is one of those people that you either hate or love. There's no in between. Probably most people hate him. Whether anybody likes it or not, everybody on earth today is a Heideggerian if you study philosophy. He completely changed philosophy. Like at one point I was reading this guy, he's like, I am not a Heideggerian, I can't be. And in this book he says, because I'm a Christian, and Heidegger rejects Christianity. And then he's totally madly in love with Heidegger and just keeps talking about how great he is the whole book. And you're like, dude, you are totally a Heideggerian. You just need to ignore the part that you didn't like and keep going. Heidegger's students are Hannah Arendt and Herbert Marcuse, who in the 20th century, of course, also do really powerful work. In other words, there's this really amazing thread that goes Plato. Aristotle was Plato's student, right? So Plato, Aristotle, Ibn Sina, Husserl, Heidegger, Hannah Arendt, and Herbert Marcuse. Somebody will bring up Sartre. Okay, it's cool. I don't really find any use for Sartre, but he was like the cheap Heidegger. He was like the 50-cent Heidegger. I know I'm being a jerk, but it's okay. I told you from the beginning I like Plato more than Aristotle. So the reason I wanted to bring that last piece in is I wanted to show you that even though Ibn Sina was 1,000 years ago, right, this is the 1,000th anniversary of the canon of medicine, 1025, he still has had a massive impact on contemporary philosophy to the point where he's the grandfather of phenomenology, which is the dominant German philosophical path. I mean, there's also the Wittgenstein thing too, but I think Heidegger won in the end, even though he's a detestable human being at some level. I just wanted to throw that out there because I know somebody's going to walk away going, I think he likes Heidegger. I mean, I'm a victim at that point. So let me wrap up because I'm out of time and I want to give some time for Q&A by telling you the end of Ibn Sina's life. He ends up spending well over a decade in Isfahan working for Dushman Ziyar. They became so close when Dushman Ziyar, he gets attacked by the Ghaznavids. They actually capture Isfahan. He and Dushman Ziyar actually go into hiding together in near Ahwaz somewhere, and then they finally retake Isfahan. And whenever Dushman Ziyar went on a military campaign, he would bring Ibn Sina with. They go to Hamadan in 1037. They're attacking the city again because it had broken away. And while they're attacking, Ibn Sina dies. And unfortunately gets buried in Hamadan, right? The place he had been imprisoned. There is a tragic piece to his story too, though, and I want to hit that for a second. And then I want to point one thing out. And that was he wrote an encyclopedia for Dushman Ziyar. When the Ghaznavids captured Isfahan, I think it was 1031 or 1030, 1031. When they captured it, they took the encyclopedia back to Ghazna. And then a century later, the Ghurids attacked Ghazna. Ala-ad-Din was the Ghurid ruler, and he burned Ghazna to the ground. In fact, he began bringing in wood to keep the fire going. He hated the city and he wanted it destroyed. And the encyclopedia was lost and nobody will ever read it. And he got the nickname Jahan Sus, which means world burner. And so the reason I wanted to point that out was it's worth remembering something about Ibn Sina's life. He lived in a really turbulent time to the point where he was constantly forced to move from town to town. He was the classic refugee. He stayed within the zone of this Persianid area, but at the end of the day, he wasn't at home. He was always somewhere else. And yet he still managed to achieve. And I think sometimes we get lost and we think, oh, if things were only a little bit more stable, if things were only a little bit more better, I could achieve. And the reality is you can achieve in the most turbulent of times, which is great because that appears to be our future. All right, so I know we need to do Q&A. I keep they're holding up signs in the back that say done. So I don't know how we're going to do this. You're going to run around with a mic? One question? Did I really go that long? Is that why you were? Oh, I did. Look, they're making frowns. 3 questions. 1 question. Somewhere between 1 to 3 questions. What? Okay. Shout.
Hello. Hi, Doctor.
Okay.
My question is, first of all, thank you very much for this insightful talk. How do you think Ibn Sina was able to reconcile Greek philosophy with Islamic theology and religion? And how was there any tensions that during that period that arose from this type of differences? Thank you.
Okay, so the question was basically, as I understand it, did he get called a heretic? Yes. And the answer is yes. So I think it was 1099. So Ibn Sina dies in 1037. So this is well after he's passed away. Ghazali writes a book called The Incoherence of the Philosophers. And what Ghazali says is, the problem with philosophy is it never lands on an answer. And by the way, he calls Ibn Sina out on necessary being. He hated that. He's like, ah! But I'll just say that why can't God have created the necessary being and then triggered it? I don't see why it's not compatible. But I'm not a theologian, so don't listen to me. In any case, Ghazali rejects Ibn Sina, and he actually says, we rely too much on science and philosophy, and we need to turn back to religion. because religion gives us answers. Every time there's a question from science or philosophy, we end up with 3 new questions and no answers. And it creates uncertainty and doubt. I personally love uncertainty and doubt. I think that there's no such thing as faith without doubt. And I think that uncertainty and doubt lead to science and discovery, and they humble you. And I think that's what we should do as a species, just become humble, because there's no way for us to ever be so glorious that we are in and of ourselves amazing, right? Like as a community we can be amazing because communities can achieve things, but individuals can't. And so I don't understand this need for that. Anyway, there's a rebuttal, and it's Ibn Rushd writes the book, which has the best title of a book ever, The Incoherence of the Incoherent. And he attempts to push back against Ghazali, and basically he says, what are you talking about? Look what science has given us. I mean, for one thing, modern medicine. Somewhere right after the Abbasid Revolution, between 750 and 800, the Arabs conducted the Arab agricultural revolution and created modern agriculture. Arab streets were lit up at night with oil lamps. They pumped fresh water into Arab homes and businesses and pumped sewage water out. They had a fast food industry. They created sorbet. Like, hello, sorbet. Why would you reject that? This was a time of incredible innovation, and they were making the world a better place. They had figured out if you take a ship and you pack it full of ice, you can throw fresh food on it, and you can send that ship to India or China, and you can sell it there. They figured out coffee. They were in Ethiopia looking for a new crop to grow. Because, right, modern agriculture, you want to have a diversified system. And they were like, what about these beans growing on this bush? This is really cool. And they grabbed a few of them, took them to Yemen, to the province of Mocha, and they planted these beans, and they were like, this is fantastic. I get a buzz off of it. It's like a Fedra. So there was definitely criticism of Ibn Sina, and it had a legacy. In the end, I think we can all agree Ghazali won, and we can all agree Ibn Rushd is winning now, right? I mean, look at UAE. UAE's become this hub of innovation. It's an exciting time to be in the UAE. I can't believe what I'm seeing. We moved here in July, and I feel lucky to be a part of it, even if I'm just an observer, just because it is such an exciting time period. If you look at the history of the Arab world, the Middle East, throw in Turkey and the Persians too. Because obviously I was just talking about a Persian. It'd be weird if I ignored them. And for that matter, Armenians and Georgians, the Middle East, the whole thing. For the last 6,500 years, since the Egyptians invented the world's first ever government, the Middle East has been the center of innovation and science and philosophy for 6,000 of those 6,500 years. There's only been a few centuries where the Middle East wasn't the global center for it. 2 of them were the last 2. And so what I see the UAE doing right now is repositioning, and other states are following, right? The Saudis are obviously jumping on board. Qatar is obviously jumping on board. There's other places jumping on board. But what I see this is the norm. And so I'm actually really excited because I feel like in a way Ibn Sina is winning again. And yeah, so anyway, I went way past what you were asking, but I don't know who's next. I'm pointing at you, but I'm not in charge.
So did Ibn Sina go to Baghdad at that time, if Baghdad was like the hub for science? And in what language did he write his books? And where would you find his books today? Are they still in the original, like the originals are preserved somewhere? And have they been, of course, translated?
So Saudi Arabia has a really old copy of the Canon of Medicine, and we were going to bring it, but we couldn't. So the Ibn Sina Pavilion is just down a ways. The Saudis did send an electronic copy, so you can actually scroll through it. And somebody graffitied in the margins. It's awful. By the way, that's not graffiti. Just thought I was trying to be funny. What was the other part of your question? Oh, okay, so he didn't. He never went to Baghdad. So there's an oversimplification that Western historians have done to the Golden Age. So it is true that the Abbasids moved a bunch of the material to Baghdad, and Baghdad did become a center of learning, but it wasn't like Alexandria. So in the Roman Empire, there was Alexandria. That was it. I mean, Ephesus tried. There was a couple of places, Athens, but Alexandria was it. With the Arabs, Baghdad was important, but it wasn't the only one. And like I said, like Bukhara, Samarkand, Isfahan, Cairo, it was actually much more dispersed. It's actually really good because right in 1258, which is only 2 centuries after Ibn Sina, Baghdad is destroyed by the Mongols, and they push the House of Wisdom into the into the Tigris River. And right, the saying is that there was so much ink, it turned the river black. Thankfully, they had copies in Cairo, which is why you can read these books. Had it been like Alexandria, it would have been much more catastrophic. And I think that this was done to sort of oversimplify. I mean, when you think of Cordoba and Toledo were centers of learning, Fez was a center, like Timbuktu, they were all over the place. It was scattered. There was no one place. So he didn't have to go to Baghdad. Farabi did. Farabi went to Baghdad and Damascus, like he was traveling. He was on tour. But Ibn Sina didn't. He stuck strictly to what is today basically Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Iran. Or I don't know why I'm pointing at you. I'm not in charge. What? Is that it? Are we done? We're done. We're done. Look at that. I feel like I'm under control. I keep going, so. By the way, thanks for being a good audience.